I always knew I was the spare, the unplanned one, the forgotten twin. My sister, let's call her Emily, was the star. She shone so bright, my parents never bothered to notice the shadow I cast beside her. From the moment we could talk, it was clear who they adored. Emily with her golden curls and bright smile was their dream come true, while I was the quiet background noise, the echo they never asked for. Emily had a room fit for a princess, pink walls, a canopy bed draped in soft, shimmering fabric, and shelves lined with toys she barely touched but cherished as symbols of her parents' love. My room. A tiny, drafty corner space with an ancient, creaky bed and a single flickering lamp. It felt more like a storage closet than a bedroom. If I ever dared to dream of a bigger space, I was quickly reminded that my sister's comfort came first. Every morning was a fresh reminder of my place in the family. I'd wake up to the sounds of my parents excitedly planning Emily's next dance recital or discussing the latest designer dress she just had to have. Meanwhile, I'd piece together my secondhand clothes, trying to blend into the background. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" became my unofficial nickname. They said it so often, I sometimes wondered if they'd just forgotten my real name. At school, it was no better. Parent-teacher conferences were a painful ritual. My teachers would hand over my straight A report cards, and my parents would barely glance at them. Too busy beaming at Emily's latest glitter-glued masterpiece. They treated her finger paintings like they were museum pieces, while my hard-earned grades gathered dust in their indifferent minds. Holidays were a special kind of torture. Every Christmas, Emily's side of the tree would overflow with brightly wrapped presents. The latest gadgets, trendy clothes, personalized jewelry. My side. A few hastily wrapped boxes, often filled with clearance bin finds or practical items like socks and notebooks. I tried not to care, but sitting there watching her tear into her mountain of gifts while my parents cooed over her every reaction chipped away at my heart piece by piece. I tried to find solace in the little things. My grandfather, for instance, was the only person who made me feel like I mattered. He'd take me fishing, tell me stories about his youth, and listen to my clumsy attempts at piano without wincing. I still remember the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled at me. A small flicker of warmth in an otherwise cold world. But even that light was snuffed out too soon. He passed away when I was 15, and his loss hit me harder than I'd ever let on. I sat in the back of the funeral hall, head bowed, while my parents ushered Emily to the front, their perfect daughter leading the mourning like the star of a tragic play. I might as well have been a stranger, just another face in the crowd. With my grandfather gone, the tiny fragments of warmth in my life turned to ash. My parents, if possible, became even more distant. It was as if losing him had reminded them of the burden I was, the unwanted, unplanned child they never asked for. They never spoke of him again, never acknowledged the bond we shared. It was as if erasing his memory would somehow erase my right to exist. When I turned 16, I thought things might change. I had started saving for college, dreaming of a life far away from the suffocating walls of my childhood home. But then Emily dropped a bombshell. She was pregnant. 16 and pregnant with a boyfriend barely out of his teens and no clear plan for the future. My parents, who I thought might finally have to confront the reality of their golden child's imperfections, did the opposite. They rallied around her through a lavish baby shower and transformed her room into a nursery fit for a royal infant. That's when my mother came to me one evening, her face tight but her eyes dancing with an excitement that felt misplaced. "We need your room," she said, as if it was the most natural request in the world. "The baby will need space, and Emily can't be cramped, you'll understand." Understand, I was stunned. My tiny, barely livable corner of the house, the only piece of space I had ever called my own, was being taken from me. I tried to protest, but my father cut me off with a tone that brooked no argument. "You're old enough to figure something out. It's time you learned to be responsible." Responsible. That word felt like a slap. I had been responsible my whole life, tiptoeing around their golden child, holding my tongue, swallowing my hurt. But this was different. This wasn't just a slight, it was an eviction. So that night, I packed my few belongings. some worn clothes, a handful of books, and the fishing rod my grandfather had given me, and walked out into the bitter night. I didn't have a plan, just a stubborn refusal to disappear quietly into the background again. I found an old tent in the garage, one my grandfather and I used for camping trips, and pitched it in the woods behind our house. The cold crept into my bones as I huddled under thin blankets, listening to the wind whisper through the trees. It wasn't much, but it was mine. It was freedom in the rawest, most unforgiving form. And as I lay there, teeth chattering, staring up at the jagged silhouettes of the trees against the starless sky, one thought burned in my mind. They might have pushed me out, but I was not going to let them define me anymore. I would survive. And one day I would find my way back, not as the forgotten twin, but as someone they would regret casting aside. Living in that tent was harder than I expected. The first few nights felt like an adventure, a desperate act of defiance, but the cold quickly stripped away any illusion of freedom. I'd wake up, shivering, my breath visible in the morning air, my fingers stiff as I tried to rub life back into them. My stomach growled constantly and my limbs ached from sleeping on the uneven ground. It felt like the world itself was testing my resolve. I tried to keep going to school. It was the only semblance of normalcy I had left. I'd sneak into the bathroom to wash up using cold water and paper towels, to scrub the dirt from my face and hands. I'd sit at my desk fighting off exhaustion, my mind drifting to the warmth of my old bed, the smell of breakfast I no longer had the luxury of waking up to. But I couldn't let my parents win. I couldn't give them the satisfaction of watching me crumble, so I pushed through. I started picking up odd jobs after school, mowing lawns, raking leaves, shoveling snow, anything that paid cash. I figured if I saved enough, I could maybe rent a cheap room somewhere, or at least buy a decent sleeping bag. One evening, as I dragged my tired body back to the woods, I noticed something odd. A light was on in the garage, my old garage. I crept closer, staying in the shadows, my heart pounding. Through the dusty window, I saw my parents stacking boxes and moving furniture, my furniture, into my old room. They'd already redecorated pastel walls and a crib in the corner, a mobile hanging from the ceiling. My chest tightened. They had erased me so easily, replaced me without a second thought. It was that moment, watching them laugh and chat as if I'd never existed, that something hardened inside me. The pain I'd been carrying, the deep-rooted hurt of being unwanted, twisted into something sharper: determination. They might have pushed me out, but they hadn't broken me. One day, as I wandered the neighborhood looking for work, I stumbled upon a small bakery at the edge of town. The windows were fogged up from the warmth inside, the smell of fresh bread and pastries drifting out like a promise. My stomach growled, reminding me I hadn't eaten since the stale crackers I found in my backpack the day before. I hesitated for a moment, then pushed the door open. A small bell tinkled as I stepped inside. The warmth hit me like a hug, the smell of sugar and yeast wrapping around me. The man behind the counter, a gruff older guy with flour dusting his apron, glanced up. He frowned, his eyes narrowing as he took in my ragged clothes and tired face. "You lost, kid," he grunted, kneading a lump of dough on the counter. I swallowed my pride. "No, sir, just wondering if you need help. I can clean your dishes, whatever you need." He looked at me for a long moment, his hands never stopping their rhythmic kneading. Then he jerked his head toward the back. "All right, grab a broom, and don't break anything." That was my first day at Frank's Bakery. It wasn't glamorous work, sweeping floors, scrubbing pans, hauling heavy bags of flour. But it was warm, and it came with day-old bread. He let me take home. That alone felt like a small miracle. As the weeks passed, Frank and I settled into an unspoken routine. I'd show up before dawn, mop the floors, help with the morning rush, and then slip out before the afternoon crowd filled the place. Frank didn't ask too many questions, and I didn't offer any explanations. We had a quiet understanding, an unspoken agreement that I was doing my best to stay afloat. One morning, as I swept the front porch, Frank leaned out the door and tossed me a small paper bag. "Here, fresh batch of croissants. Eat 'em before they go stale." I stared at him, caught off guard by the unexpected kindness. I mumbled a thank you, my throat tight, and took the bag with shaking hands. I devoured the croissants in the woods later, crumbs clinging to my jacket, my heart pounding with a mixture of gratitude and shame. Eventually, Frank started teaching me how to bake. Simple things at first, like kneading dough and shaping rolls. It felt good working with my hands, learning something new. It was a far cry from the icy tent and cold nights, a small piece of warmth in an otherwise bleak winter. After a month, Frank pulled me aside one evening as we closed up shop. He handed me a key, its brass edges worn smooth from years of use. "I've got a small room upstairs," he said, avoiding my eyes as he wiped his hands on his apron. "It's cramped and needs a good clean, but it's got a bed and a heater. You can stay there if you want." I just stood there clutching the key, my throat too tight to speak. I managed a nod, my vision blurring. That night, for the first time in months, I slept in a real bed. The mattress was lumpy, the room drafty, but it felt like a palace compared to the cold, wet ground of the woods. I curled up under a threadbare blanket, the faint hum of the heater like a lullaby. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a small spark of hope. I had a place now, a small slice of safety, and a chance to start over. I wasn't sure what the future held, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let my parents' betrayal define me. I was done being the forgotten twin, the unwanted child. I was going to make something of myself. I had to. Life above the bakery became my new normal. It wasn't perfect. The room was cramped, the walls thin enough to hear every creak and groan of the old building. But it was mine. I filled the tiny space with little things that made it feel like a real home. A second-hand alarm clock, a thrifted lamp, and a small radio. I found on the curb one rainy morning. I even managed to scavenge a battered recliner from a nearby alley. It smelled faintly of smoke and mildew, but once I wiped it down and tossed a blanket over it, it felt like a throne. Frank's gruff kindness never wavered. He taught me everything he knew about baking, his thick hands moving with surprising grace as he shaped dough or piped frosting onto delicate pastries. He never asked about my past, never pried into why a kid my age was working himself to the bone instead of going to school full-time. Maybe he saw something of himself in me, a stray kid trying to claw his way out of a bad situation. As the months rolled by, I started to feel a little more human. I gained weight, my face lost its hollow, starved look, and my hands toughened into something resembling strength. I started saving every penny I could, slipping crumpled bills into a shoebox under my bed. It wasn't much, but it felt like a step toward freedom. Then one day, Frank did something that changed everything. He handed me an envelope thick with cash. I blinked, turning it over in my hands, confused. "Your first paycheck," he said, his voice gruff as ever, but his eyes softer than I'd ever seen them. "You've earned it." I stammered a thank you, my chest tight. I ducked my head, not wanting him to see the tears burning in my eyes. That envelope felt heavier than anything I'd ever held. Not just because of the money, but because it felt like proof that I was finally worth something. With a little bit of financial breathing room, I started taking night classes at a nearby community center. It was tough, juggling work at the bakery and classes, but I felt like I was building towards something, laying the bricks for a future I could call my own. One rainy evening, as I was sweeping the bakery floor, Frank sat down at one of the tables, his joints creaking as he leaned back with a deep sigh. "Kid," he said, watching me with an unreadable expression, "you ever think about what you want to do with your life?" I paused, gripping the broom handle a little tighter. I hadn't really allowed myself to think that far ahead. I was still stuck in survival mode, too busy worrying about making it through each day to think about the years to come. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice small in the empty shop. "I just want to keep moving forward. Maybe one day have my own place, my own life." Frank grunted, nodding, like he'd expected that answer. "Good, keep that fire, kid. It'll take you places." As the months slipped into a year, I saved enough to open a small savings account. Watching those numbers tick upward felt like proof that I was more than just the unwanted twin, the cast-off kid living in a tent. I was building something real, something my parents could never take from me. Then one afternoon, the doorbell over the bakery's entrance chimed. I looked up from the register, my heart stopping in my chest. My parents stood there, framed by the warm light of the shop. My mother's perfectly styled hair gleamed like a helmet, her sharp eyes narrowing as they landed on me. For a moment, I was 16 again, standing in my cramped old room as they told me I needed to leave, that I was no longer welcome. I felt the old shame creep up, the bitter taste of betrayal filling my mouth. But then I remembered where I was. I remembered the long, cold nights in the woods, the bruises on my fingers from scrubbing floors, the ache in my back from hauling bags of flour. I straightened, lifting my chin. I wasn't that scared, defeated kid anymore. "Hello," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. "What are you doing here?" My mother's lips pinched into a tight line, and my father shifted uncomfortably, glancing around the bakery like he was evaluating a piece of real estate. "We heard you've been doing well for yourself," my mother said, her tone dripping with false warmth. "We thought we'd stop by, see how you're doing." I could see the calculation behind her eyes, the wheels turning as she took in the tidy shop, the polished counters, the warm, buttery air filled with the scent of fresh bread. I took a slow, deliberate breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "I'm doing fine. Better, actually." They exchanged a quick, uneasy glance. My father cleared his throat, his broad shoulders tensing. "That's good, son. We're proud of you." I almost laughed. Proud. These were the same people who had shoved me out the door without a second thought, who had turned my old room into a nursery before the door had even closed behind me. "Well," my mother said, smoothing her coat like she was trying to wipe away the discomfort of standing in my world. "We were thinking now that you have a stable place. Maybe we could reconnect, start fresh." I felt a sharp, bitter laugh bubble up in my throat, but I swallowed it down. Of course, they wanted back into my life now that I had something to offer. Of course, they wanted a piece of the life I'd built from the ashes of their betrayal. "I'm not interested," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "I'm doing just fine without you." Their faces fell. My mother's eyes narrowing in disbelief, my father's jaw tightening like he was ready to launch into one of his old lectures about respect and family loyalty. But I didn't wait to hear it. I turned my back, grabbed a tray of freshly baked rolls, and walked to the back of the shop, letting the door swing shut behind me. I leaned against the wall, my heart pounding, my hands shaking as I stared at the cracked, flour-dusted tiles under my feet. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had power. Real, undeniable power. I had built a life without them, and I wasn't about to let them drag me back into the darkness I had finally escaped. Life above the bakery became my new normal. It wasn't perfect. The room was cramped, the walls thin enough to hear every creak and groan of the old building. But it was mine. I filled the tiny space with little things that made it feel like a real home. A second-hand alarm clock, a thrifted lamp, and a small radio I found on the curb one rainy morning. I even managed to scavenge a battered recliner from a nearby alley. It smelled faintly of smoke and mildew, but once I wiped it down and tossed a blanket over it, it felt like a throne. Frank's gruff kindness never wavered. He taught me everything he knew about baking, his thick hands moving with surprising grace as he shaped dough or piped frosting onto delicate pastries. He never asked about my past, never pried into why a kid my age was working himself to the bone instead of going to school full-time. Maybe he saw something of himself in me, a stray kid trying to claw his way out of a bad situation. As the months rolled by, I started to feel a little more human. I gained weight, my face lost its hollow, starved look, and my hands toughened into something resembling strength. I started saving every penny I could, slipping crumpled bills into a shoebox under my bed. It wasn't much, but it felt like a step toward freedom. Then one day, Frank did something that changed everything. He handed me an envelope thick with cash. I blinked, turning it over in my hands, confused. "Your first paycheck," he said, his voice gruff as ever, but his eyes softer than I'd ever seen them. "You've earned it." I stammered, a thank you, my chest tight. I ducked my head, not wanting him to see the tears burning in my eyes. That envelope felt heavier than anything I'd ever held. not just because of the money, but because it felt like proof that I was finally worth something. With the little bit of financial breathing room, I started taking night classes at a nearby community center. It was tough juggling work at the bakery and classes, but I felt like I was building towards something, laying the bricks for a future I could call my own. One rainy evening, as I was sweeping the bakery floor, Frank sat down at one of the tables, his joints creaking as he leaned back with a deep sigh. "Kid," he said, watching me with an unreadable expression, "you ever think about what you want to do with your life?" I paused, gripping the broom handle a little tighter. I hadn't really allowed myself to think that far ahead. I was still stuck in survival mode, too busy worrying about making it through each day to think about the years to come. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice small in the empty shop. "I just want to keep moving forward. Maybe one day, have my own place, my own life." Frank grunted, nodding like he'd expected that answer. "Good, keep that fire, kid. It'll take you places." As the months slipped into a year, I saved enough to open a small savings account. Watching those numbers tick upward felt like proof that I was more than just the unwanted twin, the cast-off kid living in a tent. I was building something real, something my parents could never take from me. Then one afternoon, the doorbell over the bakery's entrance chimed. I looked up from the register, my heart stopping in my chest. My parents stood there, framed by the warm light of the shop. My mother's perfectly styled hair gleamed like a helmet, her sharp eyes narrowing as they landed on me. For a moment, I was 16 again, standing in my cramped old room as they told me I needed to leave, that I was no longer welcome. I felt the old shame creep up, the bitter taste of betrayal filling my mouth. But then I remembered where I was. I remembered the long, cold nights in the woods, the bruises on my fingers from scrubbing floors, the ache in my back from hauling bags of flour. I straightened, lifting my chin. I wasn't that scared, defeated kid anymore. "Hello," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. "What are you doing here?" My mother's lips pinched into a tight line, and my father shifted uncomfortably, glancing around the bakery like he was evaluating a piece of real estate. "We heard you've been doing well for yourself," my mother said, her tone dripping with false warmth. "We thought we'd stop by, see how you're doing." I could see the calculation behind her eyes, the wheels turning as she took in the tidy shop, the polished counters, the warm, buttery air filled with the scent of fresh bread. I took a slow, deliberate breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "I'm doing fine. Better, actually." They exchanged a quick, uneasy glance. My father cleared his throat, his broad shoulders tensing. "That's good, son. We're proud of you." I almost laughed. Proud. These were the same people who had shoved me out the door without a second thought, who had turned my old room into a nursery before the door had even closed behind me. "Well," my mother said, smoothing her coat like she was trying to wipe away the discomfort of standing in my world. "We were thinking now that you have a stable place, maybe we could reconnect, start fresh." I felt a sharp, bitter laugh bubble up in my throat, but I swallowed it down. Of course, they wanted back into my life now that I had something to offer. Of course, they wanted a piece of the life I'd built from the ashes of their betrayal. "I'm not interested," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "I'm doing just fine without you." Their faces fell, my mother's eyes narrowing in disbelief, my father's jaw tightening like he was ready to launch into one of his old lectures about respect and family loyalty. But I didn't wait to hear it. I turned my back, grabbed a tray of freshly baked rolls, and walked to the back of the shop, letting the door swing shut behind me. I leaned against the wall, my heart pounding, my hands shaking as I stared at the cracked, flour-dusted tiles under my feet. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had power. Real, undeniable power. I had built a life without them, and I wasn't about to let them drag me back into the darkness I had finally escaped. A few days after my parents' unexpected visit, the bakery felt different. I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that their appearance was more than just a nostalgic trip down memory lane. I knew them too well. They never did anything without a reason, and their sudden interest in my life set off every alarm in my mind. Frank must have noticed my distraction because he pulled me aside one morning as I was stacking freshly baked loaves onto the display shelves. "You've been off lately," he grumbled, crossing his thick arms over his flour-dusted apron. "You in some kind of trouble." I hesitated, my hands stilling on a warm loaf of sourdough. I hadn't told him about my parents. I hadn't told anyone. I didn't want to drag my past into this place, this tiny corner of the world where I'd managed to find a semblance of peace. "Nah," I said, forcing a smile, "just tired." He squinted at me, his sharp eyes missing nothing. Frank had a way of cutting through nonsense with a single glance, and I could tell he didn't buy my excuse, but to my relief, he let it drop, grumbling something about kids today never getting enough sleep. Later that evening, I trudged upstairs to my cramped little room, dropping onto my creaky bed with a long sigh. I reached under the mattress and pulled out my shoebox, my makeshift savings account. I thumbed through the crumpled bills, the small stack thicker than it had been a year ago, but still nowhere near enough for a real apartment. I leaned back, staring at the stained ceiling, my mind drifting back to my parents' visit. The way they had looked around the bakery, their eyes darting over the polished counters and freshly painted walls. It hadn't just been a family check-in. They had been evaluating the place, sizing it up. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. They weren't coming back into my life just to chat. They wanted something, and I had a sinking feeling I knew exactly what it was. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of shouting downstairs. My heart leapt into my throat as I scrambled to my feet, nearly tripping over my chair in my rush to the door. I pounded down the stairs, my socked feet slipping on the polished steps, and burst into the bakery's main room. Frank was there, his face flushed with anger, his thick arms crossed over his chest. Across the counter, my father loomed, his face twisted into a familiar mask of righteous fury. "What the hell is going on?" I demanded, my voice sharper than I intended. Both men turned to look at me. Frank's scowl deepened, but my father's face lit up with a twisted sort of satisfaction, like a predator spotting an easy meal. "There he is?" my father said, his tone dripping with false warmth. "Finally decided to show yourself, huh?" I felt my jaw clench. The last time I'd heard that tone, I'd been a scared, shivering kid on their front porch, clutching my backpack and begging for another chance. But I wasn't that kid anymore. "What are you doing here?" I snapped, stepping closer, my fists clenched at my sides. Frank shot me a warning glance, but I ignored it. I was done tiptoeing around my parents. "We need to talk," my father said, leaning over the counter like he owned the place. His eyes flicked around the bakery, his nostrils flaring at the sweet, yeasty air. "Your mother and I have been thinking, and we realized that as a family, we should support each other, stick together." I nearly choked on my own laugh. "Family, you kicked me out when I was 16. You haven't supported me in years." Frank's eyes darted between us, his jaw tightening as he took in the unfolding scene. My father's smile slipped for a moment, his jaw clenching, but then he forced it back into place, his teeth flashing in a too-wide grin. "That's in the past, son. We're here to make things right." I felt my stomach twist. I knew that tone. It was the same voice he used when he was trying to close a deal, when he wanted something from someone and needed to play nice to get it. "What do you want?" I said, my voice low and sharp. My father's eyes narrowed, his false warmth flickering for just a second. "We've hit a rough patch. The business is struggling, and we could use a bit of support. You've got a good thing going here, and we thought maybe we could work together." I felt my blood run cold. Of course, it wasn't about reconnecting. It was about money. They had seen my bakery, my small slice of success, and now they wanted a piece of it. I took a slow, deep breath, trying to calm the rage bubbling up inside me. "No." The word hung in the air, sharp and final. My father blinked clearly, not expecting such a blunt refusal. "No," he echoed, his face turning a deep, furious red. "No," I repeated, taking a step closer, meeting his furious gaze head-on. "I'm not helping you. I've built this life without you, and I'm not about to let you drag me back down." My father's jaw worked, his eyes narrowing into slits. He looked like he was about to explode, but then his gaze flicked to Frank, who was still standing behind the counter, his arms crossed, his eyes dark. "This isn't over," my father hissed, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "You owe us. We took care of you, raised you, and this is how you repay us." I felt my chest tighten, old wounds tearing open, but I forced myself to stand my ground, my chin lifting defiantly. "I don't owe you anything," I said, my voice steady despite the tremble in my hands. "You made your choice when you threw me out. Now I'm making mine." For a long moment, the only sound in the bakery was the hum of the overhead lights, the faint clatter of a tray settling on a cooling rack in the back. Finally, my father straightened, his eyes blazing with barely contained fury. He turned on his heel and stormed out, the bell above the door clanging violently as he shoved it open. I let out a long, shuddering breath, my heart pounding in my chest. I hadn't realized how tightly I'd been clenching my fists until my nails bit into my palms, drawing tiny pinpricks of blood. Frank met my gaze, his eyes softening slightly. He gave me a slow, approving nod before turning back to his work, his shoulders relaxing just a fraction. For the first time in years, I felt like I had truly stood up for myself. I had faced down the man who had once controlled every aspect of my life, and I hadn't flinched. But as the door swung shut behind my father, I couldn't shake the feeling that this confrontation was just the beginning. I expected my father to make a scene, to return with my mother demanding an apology, maybe even dragging the rest of the family in to shame me back into submission. But days passed, then weeks, and the bakery remained quiet. Frank didn't bring it up again, but I noticed he started watching me a little more closely, his eyes lingering when I passed by, his brows knitted together in a way that suggested he was waiting for the other shoe to drop. I couldn't blame him. The encounter had shaken me, too. Dragged old wounds to the surface that I had thought I'd buried for good. Then just as I was starting to relax to convince myself that my parents had finally given up, the first letter arrived. It came in a crisp white envelope, my name scrawled across the front in my mother's familiar looping handwriting. I found it wedged into the bakery's front door one morning, the corners damp from the overnight dew. My heart sank the moment I saw it. I stood there for a long moment, the early morning air cold against my skin, the steady hum of the city waking up around me. I considered throwing it in the trash, letting it rot alongside the half-eaten bagels and stale donuts. But curiosity, or maybe just the old lingering need for their approval, got the better of me. I ripped the envelope open, my hands trembling. The letter was a masterpiece of guilt tripping. My mother's words twisted around me like barbed wire, alternating between syrupy, sweet nostalgia and sharp stabs of accusation. She wrote about the sacrifices they'd made to raise me, the years they spent struggling to provide for 2 children instead of 1, the countless sleepless nights and financial hardships. She painted herself as a saint, a martyr, and me as the ungrateful, selfish son who had turned his back on his family. I felt my stomach churn as I read her words, the carefully crafted manipulation dripping from every line. "We always tried our best for you," she wrote, as if that justified the years of neglect, the cold shoulders, the dismissive glares. "Family is all we have, and we just want to reconnect to heal the rift that has grown between us." I crushed the letter in my fist, my jaw clenched so tightly my teeth ached. For a moment, I considered storming to their house, throwing the crumpled paper in their faces and screaming all the words I had swallowed for years. But I didn't. I was better than that. I had clawed my way out of the darkness they had thrown me into, and I wasn't about to let them drag me back down. Instead, I tossed the letter into the nearest trash can, my hands shaking my breath, coming in short, angry gasps. But the letters didn't stop. Every few days, another one would appear. Sometimes slipped under the bakery door, sometimes jammed into the frame of my apartment building. They started arriving at my night classes too. Crumpled envelopes left on my desk slipped into my backpack when I wasn't looking. I started to feel like I was being hunted, the walls closing in around me. I couldn't focus on my studies. My hands trembled at work, and I found myself jumping at every shadow, every creak of the old bakery's floors. Then one day, a different kind of envelope arrived. This one was larger, heavier, and stamped with the official seal of a law firm. I felt my blood run cold as I ripped it open, my heart pounding in my ears. Inside was a notice of intent to sue. My parents were contesting my ownership of the bakery. They claimed that I had used money they had given me, money that, according to them, had been meant to support me while I found my footing, to buy the place. They were demanding a share of the profits, back pay for the years they had supposedly invested in me, and even a cut of the property value. I felt the room tilt around me, the walls seeming to close in as I read through the dense legal jargon. They were trying to take my bakery. They were trying to take the one thing I had managed to build for myself, the tiny slice of independence I had bled for, starved for, nearly frozen to death for. I sank into the nearest chair, my mind reeling, my hands numb as the papers fluttered to the floor around me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced my tiny apartment, the old floorboards creaking under my bare feet, my mind racing. I couldn't let them win. I couldn't let them take this from me. The next morning, I skipped my classes and took the train downtown. My jaw clenched, my fists tight in my pockets. I found the law firm listed on the papers, a towering glass building that loomed over the street like a fortress. I pushed through the revolving doors, my heart pounding, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts. The receptionist looked up as I approached, her bright professional smile freezing as she took in my wild eyes and clenched fists. "I need to see someone about a lawsuit," I said, my voice hoarse, my chest tight. A few hours later, I found myself sitting in a small, sterile conference room, the walls lined with bookshelves full of thick, leather-bound volumes. Across from me sat a woman in a sharp gray suit, her eyes bright behind thin, wire-framed glasses. She listened patiently as I poured out my story, my words tumbling over each other in my desperation to make her understand. When I finally finished, my throat raw and my hands shaking, she leaned back in her chair, her sharp eyes narrowing as she considered me. "They don't have a case," she said finally, her voice calm and measured, "but that doesn't mean they can't make your life hell for a while." I felt a surge of relief, my shoulders sagging as the tension bled out of me. But she continued, her tone hardening. "If you want to win this, you're going to have to fight. You'll need proof that you bought this bakery with your own money, that you've been supporting yourself, that you aren't the spoiled, entitled kid they're trying to paint you as." I nodded, my jaw tightening as I straightened in my seat. "I can do that," I said, my voice steady, despite the fear churning in my gut. "I won't let them take this from me." She smiled, then a sharp, predatory grin that sent a chill down my spine. "Good," she said, leaning forward, her eyes glittering. "Then let's make sure they regret ever trying." After that first meeting with my lawyer, I felt a fire reignite inside me. The fear that had threatened to swallow me whole slowly gave way to a simmering anger, a determination to stand my ground no matter the cost. I wasn't just fighting for my bakery. I was fighting for my dignity, my independence, my right to exist without their shadow hanging over me. The first thing I did was gather every scrap of evidence I could find. I pulled out the shoebox from under my bed, the one stuffed with crumpled bills and faded receipts, the brittle reminders of every odd job I had taken to survive. I went back through my phone, digging up old text messages from people I'd done work for, the small favors and side gigs that had kept me afloat during those long, bitter months in the tent. I even found the old check stubs from my first days at Frank's Bakery, the ones he had handed me with a gruff nod and a pat on the shoulder. I filed them away carefully, my hands shaking with a mix of anxiety and anger as I built my case piece by piece. The next step was confronting my parents. My lawyer advised against it, but I knew I couldn't move forward without facing them one last time. I needed to look them in the eyes and tell them without a shadow of a doubt that I would not be broken again. I showed up on their doorstep one rainy Saturday morning, my fists clenched, my jaw tight. I half expected them to slam the door in my face, but my mother opened it with a sharp intake of breath, her eyes widening in shock as she took in my soaked, bedraggled form. "Matthew," she breathed, her hand flying to her chest. "What are you doing here?" I forced a tight, bitter smile. "I think you know exactly why I'm here." She stepped back, her hand trembling as she gestured for me to come inside. I hesitated, my boots dripping muddy water onto their pristine welcome mat, but then I squared my shoulders and stepped over the threshold. The house looked just as I remembered it. Spotless cold, more a museum of family pride than a real home. My father appeared in the doorway to the living room, his eyes narrowing as he caught sight of me. He said nothing, just crossed his thick arms over his chest, his jaw tightening as he leaned against the doorframe. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to meet his gaze. I know about the lawsuit. My mother's face paled, her hand clenching around the edge of the hallway table, her knuckles turning white. "You don't understand," she stammered, her voice wavering. "We're just trying to make things right to get what we're owed." I felt a bitter laugh bubble up in my throat, but I swallowed it down. "What you're owed?" I echoed, my voice sharp, each word a knife's edge. "You kicked me out when I was a kid. You left me to freeze in a tent while you redecorated my room for your golden child's baby. You don't get to come back now, years later, and demand a share of what I've built from the ground up." My father's face twisted into a scowl, his eyes flashing with barely contained fury. "Watch your tone, boy," he snapped, his voice low and dangerous. "We took care of you for years. You owe us." I took a step closer, my heart pounding in my chest, my hands trembling at my sides. "No," I said, my voice trembling with barely contained rage. "I don't owe you anything. I've paid my dues. I've bled for every dollar I've earned, every brick of that bakery I built from scratch. You don't get to take that from me." For a long moment, the only sound in the house was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, the slow, relentless countdown of my patience. My mother's lip quivered, her eyes filling with the first real hint of fear I had ever seen in them. "Matthew, please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "We're family." I felt my chest tighten, the old familiar ache of wanting their love, their approval threatening to drown me. But I pushed it down, burying it deep where it could never hurt me again. "Family," I spat, my hands clenching into fists. "You don't get to play that card. Not after everything you've done." Without another word, I turned on my heel and walked out the door. The sound of my mother's sobs echoing down the hallway as I stepped back into the rain. The first court date arrived faster than I had expected. I stood outside the courthouse, my heart pounding, my hands clammy as I stared up at the imposing stone facade. My lawyer, the sharp-eyed woman with the wire-framed glasses, appeared at my side, her mouth set in a tight line. "Ready?" she asked, her voice low and steady. I took a deep breath, forcing my hands to stop shaking. "Yeah," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "Let's do this." The courtroom felt cold, the air thick with tension as I took my seat at the defendant's table. My parents sat across from me, their faces pale, their eyes narrowed as they avoided my gaze. The proceedings dragged on for hours. The judge flipping through stacks of paperwork, the lawyers arguing back and forth, their voices echoing off the polished wood paneling. Finally, my lawyer stood, her voice sharp as she presented the pile of receipts, check stubs, and text messages I had spent weeks compiling. She laid out my case with brutal precision, each piece of evidence a nail in the coffin of my parents' lies. When she finished, the courtroom fell into a stunned silence, the air thick with the weight of unspoken words. The judge leaned back in his chair, his eyes hard as he studied my parents, their faces pale and drawn. "I find the defendant's evidence compelling," he said, finally, his deep voice echoing through the room. "The plaintiff's claims are unsubstantiated and appear to be nothing more than a desperate attempt to exploit their son's success." My parents' lawyer stammered a weak protest, but the judge silenced him with a wave of his hand. "I hereby dismiss the case," he said, his voice ringing with finality. "And I strongly advise the plaintiffs to reconsider their actions before pursuing further litigation." I felt a wave of relief crash over me, my hands trembling as I gripped the edge of the table, my heart pounding in my chest. As the judge's gavel struck the desk, I glanced up, locking eyes with my parents for one final bitter moment. My father's face was twisted with rage, his jaw clenched, his eyes burning with a hatred I had never seen before. But my mother looked broken. Her shoulders slumped, her eyes hollow, her carefully crafted mask shattered beyond repair. I stood, my legs shaky but steady, and walked out of the courtroom without a backward glance. For the first time in years, I felt free to return to. My sister allowed me to cover the cost of her engagement party. Then, as if I were unimportant, she and my folks invited me back. I canceled everything and watched them fall apart. I'm Lauren, and I've always been the family member that isn't seen, like the child in the background of every picture who's clearing up the mess or holding the snacks while everyone else is having a good time. Yes, I was that person. To be honest, it all began with the birth of my younger sister, Amber. Before she entered my life at the age of 5, I believed everything was okay, drawing on walls, watching cartoons, and receiving all the hugs and goodnight stories. I was just a child. When Amber arrived, it seemed as though the spotlight had been turned off for me. It was all about her. I initially thought, well, babies are cute. They require a lot of care, don't they? However, this was not your typical new baby things. My parents loved more than simply Amber. They revered her. "Look at our little star," Mom would remark, holding her up. Dad would be overjoyed as if she had just cured him of cancer. In the meanwhile, I was like, "Hi there." My mother would look at the dinosaur drawing I had drawn and say, "That's nice, honey," before swooning over Amber's spontaneous burp. Amber was the life of every family gathering by the time she was 3 years old. Mom would bring everyone over to watch her whirl around in a tutu when she started ballet. I swear, as I'm in the corner giving out cups of juice, every single one of my family has a video of Amber dancing in the living room on their phones. As I brought out plates and napkins, Mom would say, "Lauren, help me with this," without even looking up. The problem was that Amber was actually skilled at certain things. When it came to school plays or talent showcases, she was always chosen first. She seemed to have a natural ability to draw people in, and I was simply there. I didn't despise her at all. I simply felt as though I didn't exist. It was more than simply family matters, though. It was also daily life, my mother would say. "Lauren, take Amber outside to practice her cartwheels," before I could even finish telling my parents that I had received an A on my science report. "No, hello. How did your day go? Did you do a fantastic job on your project? Go assist Amber, please." Then there were the household tasks, the duties. Oh my God, Amber probably had no idea where we kept the broom. I was responsible for cleaning any dishes that were in the sink. There is a mountain of laundry. Can you guess whose task it was? Mom was usually too busy bringing Amber to dancing class, so I started learning how to cook when I was 8 years old. She would claim, "You're the big sister, you must lead by example." It would have been good to be acknowledged even if I didn't want a parade for folding socks. Only until something went wrong did anyone take notice of me. Amber may have spilled juice on the carpet since I didn't keep a close enough eye on her. I was careless, which is why she could have scratched her knee. I'm not sure how I was able to take the responsibility for things even though I wasn't present. My instructor phoned my parents one day to let them know that I had been assisting other students with their arithmetic assignments. She must have assumed they would be proud instead. My mother just replied, "That's nice," when I returned home. "Today, did you remember to clean the restroom? I mean, are you serious?" The restroom school was my only true retreat. I enrolled in as many clubs as I could and immersed myself into my academics. Anything to avoid going inside to get away from the continuous. I even started going to the library after school. "Lauren, can you help Amber with this?" Amber, on the other hand, was receiving several honors. She kept trophies and medals, dancing contests, talent performances, and even sporadic painting contests on this shelf in the living room. She went in once Mom and Dad would cheer if she even sneezed, and I would be perceived as unsupportive or negative if I mentioned it. I enjoyed sketching, so I recall requesting a set of colored pencils. One Christmas, I opened my present to find a set of simple pencils, the sort of thing you'd find in a school supply box, you know. In contrast, Amber received a personalized leotard with her name inscribed on it, as well as a brand new ballet bar. She may not have even said, "Thank you." Amber wasn't even rude about it, which was the worst thing. She was nothing but a bully, she simply was, and everyone else behaved as if that was sufficient. There was no need for her to attempt. She was not required to work. Since she was Amber, everything was given to her. When I was around 12 years old, I recall asking my mother why Amber was exempt from household tasks. Mom simply shrugged and explained that her activities keep her very busy. "Lauren, you're good at maintaining order." That was it. No thought, no conversation, that perhaps I was also worn out. Okay, so by the time I was 13, I had essentially come to terms with being the family's sidekick. The star wasn't me, not even close. I was like a far-off planet simply circling Amber, who was the sun. It was unfair. What could I do, though? Then this chance presented itself at school one day. A trip to the state capitol over the weekend was announced by our history instructor. We would go to museums, the ancient courthouse, and even meet some local authorities during this large event. Only a few children were chosen, and I managed to make the cut somehow. I thought I might blow up because I was so delighted. I gave Mom the permission paper when I arrived home and began talking endlessly about how wonderful the vacation was going to be. Her eyes seldom left her tablet. "That's good," I said. She said good. I said as if I were jumping. "This is big, Mom. We get to see the governor's residence and spend the night at a hotel. They even promised to show us the archives." At last, she scowled as she looked at the document. "This is next weekend, Lauren." "Yes, I am aware of it." She placed the paper on the counter and shook her head. "You cannot simply leave like that. I lost all of my enthusiasm." "What? Why not?" "Next weekend is Amber's gymnastics meet." As if that were the most apparent thing in the world, she said. "We'll need your assistance with food and costumes." She seemed serious, but I kept looking at her, waiting for the joke. "This is a school excursion, Mom." "It's instructive." "For once, can't you manage Amber meet without me?" She let out a sigh as if I were being crazy. "Don't be selfish, Lauren," Dad said from the living room, not even taking his eyes from the TV. "Amber needs you. Lauren, your sister has a bright future ahead of her. It should make you proud to back her." Feeling proud. Should I have been proud to sew sequins onto leotards and pack granola bars? However, I find this to be significant. My voice cracked as I spoke. Mom gave me a wave. "Next time you can go." The next time didn't exist. I would be in high school by the time the trip happened again, and it only happened every few years. They didn't care, though. They didn't give a damn. My students were shooting pictures in front of famous sites that weekend in a packed gymnasium. I sat on a metal seat and watched Amber perform flips as my parents applauded, as if she were an Olympic competitor. I felt like screaming. In the end, Amber took home a little medal for her age category. Mom forced me to snap photos of her holding it and beaming broadly. "Isn't she incredible?" Mom remarked as she prodded me. "Yes," I whispered. "Fantastic." Shortly afterward, Amber's gymnastics career came to a standstill. She went from the beam when she was rehearsing a difficult performance in class. I still wince at the snap her wrist made as she hit the floor. Mom took her to the emergency room, and they returned home with a lengthy list of the doctor's orders and Amber's arm in a cast. But the worst thing wasn't the fracture. Amber may never fully recover her flexibility, according to the physicians. Competitive gymnastics was out of the question. My parents somehow made things worse, even though you would think that would have been enough of a blow. Mom was pacing the living room while crying. What will we do at this point? Her entire future was in gymnastics. Dad rubbed his temples while seated in his chair. "It's a catastrophe." Mom barged in when I was working on my schoolwork in the kitchen. "It's your fault, Lauren." I was so shocked that I blinked at her. "What, you ought to have been overseeing her warm-ups," she remarked sharply. I let my pencil fall. I wasn't present at all. "That's right," she said. "You ought to have assisted her there. However, no, you're always preoccupied with oneself. You're sitting there doing your schoolwork as if nothing happened while this family is disintegrating." I was at a loss for words. I couldn't claim. They never paid attention, anyhow. Dad added more. "Perhaps Amber wouldn't have been harmed if you had spent more time with this family and less time whining." That was the end of it. For a month, I was grounded. No phone, no TV, and no socializing with pals. I didn't have many in the first place. Schoolwork and my parents' continual guilt trips took over my life. Amber, on the other hand, made the most of her injury. With her cast raised up, she would relax on the couch and yell commands like, "Can you get me some water, Lauren?" Or ask Lauren to assist me with my schoolwork. Mom, I made an effort not to be angry with her. She was simply allowing everyone to take care of her as she had always done. She wasn't to blame. She was regarded like royalty by our parents while I was treated as the helper. However, that didn't make swallowing any simpler. The only place I could get away to was our town's peaceful and comfortable bakery, owned by Mia's parents. After school, Mia and I would hang around there and assist with little tasks like sweeping floors or folding boxes. Scott and Dana, her parents, were the type of individuals who truly pay attention. Donna would inquire whether I had eaten if I appeared exhausted. Scott would nod and tell me, "Good work, kid," whenever I did anything well. Even though it was so little, it had great meaning for me. They gave me a sense of importance as if I were more than a contingency plan. The problem is that my parents had the option to be like that, but chose not to. I was there in front of them drowning in their expectations, but they were too busy propping up Amber to see me. I gave up, hoping that things would improve. If they hadn't already spotted me. They wouldn't. I was just going through the motions. By the time I was 18, I spent as much time as I could at school, the library, or Mia's family bakery, and I didn't actually talk to my parents until absolutely necessary. Home no longer felt like home. Until I could find out how to get out. It seemed like I was stuck there. When my senior year arrived, I felt a glimmer of optimism for the first time in a very long time. Being admitted to a public university was the culmination of my diligent academic efforts. Although it wasn't Ivy League or anything, it was reliable and seemed to be my way out. In addition, I received a half scholarship. It was a start, but not enough to cover everything. I thought the best way to attract their attention was to wait until supper to bring it up. Amber was browsing through her phone as usual while Dad was slicing up some roast chicken. I moved the letter of acceptance across the table I entered. I spoke, attempting to maintain a steady tone. Mom gave it a quick glance before turning back to her dish. "That's good, Lauren." "Good." All I received was pleasant after years of hard effort to make this happen. Still, I pressed onward. It's reasonably priced. A portion of the tuition is already covered by a scholarship I have. For the rest, I only need a little assistance. Mom let out a sigh, the manner in which she consistently responded to my requests. "Lauren, we're not borrowing money. I'm not requesting loans," I answered hastily. "All I need is some upfront assistance. I'll reimburse you in full if you want. I'll even sign anything." At last, Dad raised his head. "Lauren, not everyone is cut out for college. It's best for some folks to start working straight immediately." Amber hardly looked up from her phone as she snickered. "Yes, perhaps you ought to have considered that before squandering so much time on your study." My hands squeezed beneath the table. "This is not a time waster. I've already calculated it. I'll graduate, get employment, and reimburse you. All I need is a little assistance to get going." Mom gave a headshake. "The funds are not available to us, Lauren. You must have realism. Perhaps there's a job in the shopping center or something. Many folks manage just well without attending college." I fought back tears as I looked at my untouched plate. They had the funds. I was certain that they did. Both Amber's gymnastics classes and the countless art supplies and piano lessons they purchased for her. After she stopped, gymnastics were expensive. Nothing, however, in my case. I went to the bakery after supper in the hopes that Mia would be there. Before I blew out, I wanted someone to vent to. As soon as she saw my face, she realized something was off. She was cleaning the counter when I entered. "What took place?" "Setting down the cloth," she inquired. I flopped down on a stool and filled her in. How my parents essentially advised me to go lost how I got into college and how I just needed a little support. "They don't even seem to care that I did everything correctly," I replied, my voice breaking straight. "As in all the extracurriculars." It was unusual for Mia to be silent at first. Usually, to lift my spirits, she would remark something witty or sardonic, but this time she simply nodded. She whispered, "Hang on," and vanished into the rear room. She returned with her parents a few minutes later. Although I had always been treated with kindness, I wasn't prepared for what happened next. Donna, who was seated across from me, said, "Lauren, Mia explained the situation to us. We wish to assist." I began to shake my head. "No, that is not something I can ask of you." Scott cut in. "You're not asking, we're making an offer. We've seen how hard you work throughout the years that you've worked at our bakery. You're worthy of this opportunity." Donna gave a nod. "We will pay for your education. After lessons, you'll work here part-time and you can reimburse us when you can." No hurry, no interest. What I was hearing was unbelievable. They were more willing to help me than my own parents ever were, and they weren't even connected to me. I began to cry, and for the first time in a long time, it wasn't because I was angry or frustrated. They came from relief. I went home that evening and packed my belongings. I didn't announce anything significant. I just packed a few suitcases with clothing and necessities in silence. On top of that, the admission letter served as a reminder that I was at last leaving. My folks hardly noticed me when I departed the next morning. Dad was already halfway out the door for work, and Mom was busy preparing Amber's breakfast. Amber remained glued to her phone. Going to college was like entering a completely different universe. It wasn't flawless. Most of the time, I had to balance courses, part-time, employment at the bakery, and the stress of being broke. It was mine, though. I wasn't cleaning up after other people or taking the blame for things I didn't do for the first time in my life. At last, I could just concentrate on myself. It wasn't a luxury dorm, it wasn't big. Although my roommate Steph had a tendency of playing country music at odd hours and the mattress was rough, we got along just well. Like me, she was a freshman and we bonded over cheap takeout and late-night study sessions. It was good to have someone to talk to who didn't think of me as Amber, even though we weren't exactly best friends. Sister classes were serious business. Although I had always done well in school, college was a whole other level. Business administration was my major, which first seemed quite dull. But the more I studied it, the more it made sense. I was reminded of my work at the bakery by a lot of the lessons we learned about organizing, budgeting, and problem solving. I was only learning how to advance it at this point. In any case, the bakery continued to play a significant role in my life. I handled everything from taking orders to managing inventory while working there most weekends and a few evenings a week. I adored it, even if it wasn't flashy. I had the impression that I was making a significant contribution. Also, it was always enjoyable to talk to the regulars. There was the group of college students who swore by our blueberry muffins and Mr. Peters, who came in every Saturday for a cinnamon bun and a black coffee. Scott summoned me into the back office one day. My initial reaction was, what the devil did I do wrong? He handed me a clipboard instead of putting me in trouble, saying, "Lauren, you've been doing a great job. We would want you to oversee the growth of our catering company." I was in full shock when I looked at him. "Me control it. You're trustworthy, well-organized, and have a strong mathematical sense," he remarked. "We have faith in you." I was at a loss for words. I had never been trusted with something so significant before. I promised not to disappoint you. I meant it too, although starting the catering company was difficult. It also felt like a game changer. I poured myself into it, assisting with marketing, scheduling, and order management. We started receiving calls for small events, study groups, club meetings, and other things after I created a flyer that we posted across campus a few weeks later. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning, and every event that went well seemed like a victory. My lessons, meanwhile, began to make more sense. When I applied supply chain management and financial forecasting to the bakery, two formerly abstract ideas began to make sense. I used to think, oh, this is exactly like what I did with the catering schedule last week while I was listening to lectures. Everything I was studying seemed to have a practical application, which really aided in maintaining my motivation. Naturally, things weren't flawless. Sometimes I felt so exhausted that I wondered if all of this work was worth it. And other nights I hardly slept because I was completing an assignment or getting ready for a catering event. However, I would then remind myself of my motivation. I was pursuing more than simply a degree or a salary. I was creating a life free from dependency and without having to be a doormat for anyone. Things at home were far away. My parents hardly ever phoned, and when they did, it was just for brief, surface-level discussions. "How is school going?" Before I could respond to her question, Mom would start telling a tale about Amber, more out of duty than anything else. I returned home for supper on Thanksgiving. Mom was busy making sure everyone was aware of Amber's latest painting courses, while Amber sat at the table looking through pictures on her phone. Mom said something that made me freeze, but I tried to ignore it and concentrate on the mashed potatoes on my plate. To ensure Amber can attend the college of her choosing, we have been saving for years. With my 4 covering the air, I gazed at her. Have you been putting money aside for Amherst College? Mom looked up, perplexed. Naturally, our goal has always been to provide her with the greatest opportunities, the greatest chances. Huh? When I needed help paying my tuition, those same parents advised me to get a job at the mall. The same individuals who didn't care about my plans or grades. There was nothing else I said. I didn't think I could talk without going crazy. After finishing my meal, I turned off the noises of my family's laughter and conversation, which were making me anxious. Naturally, Amber appeared happy with herself, as if it were only fitting that our parents would give her priority that evening. I decided back in the bedroom of my youth. It's okay. If my parents didn't care enough about me to make investments in my future, I wouldn't give them any more of my emotional energy. Our connection would be entirely transactional from this point on. I wouldn't act like their daughter since they didn't view me as such. Detaching was not as difficult as I had anticipated. My encounter with Mr. Wallace was the high point of my sophomore year. One evening, wearing a well-tailored suit that shouted business, he arrived looking as sharp as ever. He grinned and remarked, "Lauren, right?" as I rung up his order, which included his typical coffee and muffin. I blinked. Yes, I am, that. He gave a nod. You've done a fantastic job here. I've been seeing how efficiently everything operates here, and it's amazing. Regards. A little flustered, I said, but it's a team effort. Yet, he responded, passing his card to me. At my company, we're constantly searching for intelligent, diligent individuals. When you graduate, call me if you're interested. With my thoughts racing, I slipped the card into my pocket. Although I wanted to seize the chance immediately, I reminded myself that I still had 2 years of education remaining. Still, I felt like all I'd been striving for had been validated when someone like him recognized my ability. I repaid every dime of the tuition loans I received from Scott and Donna at the conclusion of my sophomore year. Knowing that I had fulfilled my commitment for so long made it feel fantastic to give them that last check I had been attempting to show my value to my parents in an attempt to get their approval. But I had come to the realization that I didn't need it. It was sufficient that I have individuals in my life who recognized my worth. I was cruising by the time I started my junior year. Not in a simple manner. Although my life was still hectic and draining, I had settled into a routine. The classes were going nicely. The prospect of a genuine future didn't seem so distant anymore, and I was earning a respectable living at the bakery. That's why I was surprised one evening when my folks phoned. Something urged me to take it up. Even though I considered ignoring it, I responded, "Hello, Mom," preparing myself for whatever Amber-related news was about to arrive. "Oh, Lauren," she replied, sounding as though she had been sobbing. "We must speak." I felt sick to my stomach. "What's happening?" "It's simply," she let out a deep sigh. "You're in a hard spot right now since your dad made some poor investments. We're having trouble paying the bills." Unsure of what to say, I blinked. Neither of my parents had ever acknowledged that they were having difficulties. "That's unfortunate to hear." With caution, I said, "We hoped you could assist us." "Quickly," she said, "only until we are able to stand again." "We know you're doing well today, and you've always been so responsible." It was there. They had no interest in my well-being or the experiences that led me to this place. All they wanted from me was something. "What sort of assistance are you referring to?" Trying to seem unbiased, I asked. "Perhaps you could get us a credit card," she said. "Just a little point to make utilities and groceries. Nothing fancy, of course." I sat there looking at my desk's pile of textbooks. After everything they had done to me, they had the audacity to ask for money. At the same time, though, I considered what saying no might entail. No longer was it about Amber or their decisions. I had to make a decision about whether or not I wanted to be involved in their lives. "Okay," I said at last. "But there will be restrictions, $1,500 per month and nothing else. Utilities, groceries, and necessities alone." "Oh, I'm very grateful, dear," Mom cried. "How much this means to us is beyond your comprehension." Her tone of thanks seemed sincere, but I refrained from becoming overconfident. I anticipated this outcome. The card was easy to set up. I connected it to my account, but I kept a careful eye on it. The initial months were fairly successful. Small groceries, petrol, and the odd mid-range restaurant meal were the charges. Nothing ostentatious. I briefly believed that perhaps this time will be different. Mom began to contact more frequently generally to inform me on their spending. She would add, "We're keeping it really modest. Only the essentials." I didn't talk much, but occasionally the conversations would stray into her typical updates about Amber. I didn't mind that our connection had devolved into a transactional one. Naturally, Amber wasn't very happy about my participation. Lauren must know everything, but why? On one of Mom's calls, I heard her snap, "Why don't you let me take care of it? You're not even employed," Mom retaliated. Listening to them quarrel was one of the rare occasions when I felt a tiny feeling of accomplishment. As the months stretched into a year, I began to relax my control. I hardly saw the money leave my account, and the charges remained constant. I wasn't having any difficulties. In addition, I was still holding Mr. Wallace's business card in my wallet, anticipating graduation. The first warning sign appeared on a random Tuesday, though, so I suppose I allowed myself to get overconfident. As I did each month, I was looking over my credit card account when I saw a $600 charge from a boutique clothes store. I contacted my mother right away. "What is this?" "Oh," she responded, as if it were no great issue. "That's just a little something for Amber." She had an occasion where she required a new dress. I squeezed my nasal bridge. "This card isn't for clothing, Mom. It's for needs. This weekend she will meet Ryan's parents. Mom said she needs to leave a positive impression." Amber's new boyfriend was Ryan, the most recent in a lengthy sequence. It captivated my parents. Mom's constant gushing told me that he was from a wealthy family that owned luxury auto dealerships. But I had never met him. I simply ignored it. It was like entering another planet when I started working at Mr. Wallace's business after graduating. It wasn't stuffy, but it was corporate. They provided me meaningful work, valued my opinions, and compensated me more than I ever would have imagined. In my life, for the first time, I wasn't barely getting by. I had the money to buy wonderful things. Even a stylish small apartment in the city, a dependable automobile, and brand new clothing that weren't from the sale store. Naturally, word reached my parents. Not even a week after I started working, Mom called. Her voice was very lovely. It nearly caused my teeth to ache. "We are very proud of you, Lauren, honey, an important position at such a reputable organization. We always knew you would succeed." Skeptical, I said. By now, I would be able to read between the lines. She went on, her voice taking on that phony, casual tone that always hinted at trouble. "We've just been thinking, perhaps we might raise the card limit a little bit now that you're doing so well, for emergencies, you know." "To what extent is a little?" I inquired already, fearing the response. "Well, don't you think $200, $500 is reasonable? Amber painting programs are not inexpensive, and groceries are becoming more costly." It was there. It had nothing to do with utilities or food. Amber was the subject. Amber was constantly at the center. "No," I responded bluntly. Mom gave me a tense laugh as if I were kidding. "Lauren, stop being so frugal. Now you're making a lot of money. We are related." "Exactly," I answered. "I'm already giving you $500 a month because of this." For needs, that is more than sufficient. She didn't disagree directly, but when she answered, "All right, if that's how you feel," I could hear the disappointment in her voice. That seemed to be the end of it. However, the entitlement merely increased. All of a sudden, every phone conversation focused on how pleased they were of me and how much I was prospering. Some not-so-subtle clues about what else I could do for them always followed. It didn't stop. They viewed my accomplishment as their own. Their money is my money. They presented whatever they want as an investment in Amber's future, and each time I turn it off? "No, Mother. I'm sorry, Father. The budget does not include it. I've done more than enough already." They obviously didn't enjoy hearing it, but I didn't mind. I had been their doormat all my life, and I had no intention of changing. I should have anticipated the betrayal by the time it occurred. How many opportunities can you give someone before they reveal their true selves to you? However, I didn't anticipate it to be this horrible, despite everything. Every absurd request, every guilt trip. It began with a picture. I was at work looking over reports when a notification buzzed on my phone. Amber's Instagram was the source. Since her posts were consistently the same, I usually disregarded them. She may be flaunting her most recent accomplishment or posing in an expensive suit. However, this one drew my attention since even for her, it was quite extravagant. Engaged, blessed to celebrate with family in Monaco was the caption. So appreciative. First hashtag, the family. The image was awful. Amber was around a man I thought was Ryan, while she stood on the deck of an opulent boat. My parents were also present. They were beaming as if they had won the lotto. In addition, I didn't identify two other individuals. Ryan's parents, most likely. Pure Monaco, glistening blue waters, elegant boats, and the type of architecture you only see in movies served as the backdrop. As I continued to read the message, I felt sick to my stomach. Piecing things together didn't take long. They were celebrating Amber and Ryan's engagement by traveling to Monaco for a week. Ryan, his family. Amber and my parents all live in one of the priciest areas on the planet. What's the best part? My money had been used for everything. It was confirmed by a simple check of my banking app. 6-person first-class tickets cost $18,000 to $1,000 each. A week's yacht hire costs $25,000. Private tours to Monte Carlo, spa treatments, and dinners at restaurants with Michelin stars. The total came to more than $50,000. It seemed unbelievable to me. They used the card I gave them to pay for food and utilities to finance a fantastic trip to Monaco, to which I was not even invited. I contacted my mother right away. On the second ring, she responded in a gratingly cheerful tone. "Hello, dear. How is work going? You're where?" Trying to speak steadily, I asked. A pause occurred. In the background, I could hear waves and soft music. "Well, we're simply taking a brief respite. You are aware of how difficult the recent events have been." I gave a brief break. "You're spending my money in Monaco with Ryan's family." It was deafeningly quiet on her end. She mumbled at last. "Don't be theatrical." "Lauren, is it dramatic?" Now my voice was trembling. The card was maxed out. "You went on a trip to which I wasn't even invited and spent more than $50,000 without telling me." On the defensive, she responded, "You didn't have to be here. It has to do with Ryan and Amber." It's their time. Amber's voice could be heard in the background before I could reply. "Is Lauren there? Let me speak with her." Amber was on the line after a little moving. Lauren, her voice was brimming with frustration as she spoke. "For once, could you not wreck everything? This is a significant excursion. Ryan's parents must see that we are a prosperous and encouraging family while they are here." I gave a sour laugh. "A prosperous family? You have no jobs at all. My money is what you live on." "Oh, please," she laughed. "You earn a lot. What does $50,000 mean to you? You're not having any difficulties. You didn't even ask." "So," I shot back, "and it's my money." Amber didn't pause for anything. "Perhaps we would include you if you weren't constantly so resentful." "To be honest, though, you don't belong here. It's awkward because of you." My mouth fell open, uncomfortable. "You're even traveling because of me. Without me, you wouldn't be able to afford this." "Exactly," answered Amber icily. "You're just good at that. You don't belong to this family. All you are is a wallet." Before I could reply, the line died. Anger and incredulity tightened my chest as I gazed at my phone. The money was no longer the only consideration. It had to do with the fact that they didn't even consider me a person. I was only a tool that they could utilize and then throw away. My hands trembled as I clicked through the banking app once more. A burden was lifted off my shoulders. I canceled the private excursions, the spa appointments, the Michelin-starred dinners, and the boat rental first. At last, I canceled their flights back. I continued after that. To ensure they couldn't charge me another dime, I completely deleted the card. The ramifications quickly began to occur. Within an hour, my phone exploded. Calls came in from Mom, Dad, Amber, and even Ryan. Fake sweetness filled Mom's voicemail. Please give me a call back. Lauren, honey. We must speak. All of this is miscommunication. Dad sounded more menacing. Now, young woman, fix this. The family is being embarrassed by you. Naturally, Amber immediately started insulting others. Whatever you just done, you had best take it back or you'll regret it, Lauren. I promise you. Even a message was left by Ryan. I'm not sure what's happening, but you must give us a call back right now. None of them got a response from me. Rather, I logged off of social media for the evening and blocked their numbers. I wasn't shocked to read Amber's most recent Instagram post when I browsed through it the next morning. She had posted a lengthy tirade about poisonous siblings and how out of envy I had wrecked her engagement trip. It was precisely what you would anticipate from the comments. Supportive comments from her pals included, "What kind of sister does that?" Additionally, "It's better for you without her." I wasn't going to let her dictate the story. Though I uploaded my own answer along with screenshots of the communications I had received from them and the charges, I did really cancel everything. There are repercussions for actions. It was not long before the tide turned. By the end of the day, many were criticizing Amber for her arrogance, and some even shared my post. Strangers were advising her to mature in her comment section. What followed was revealed to me by mutual friends. My family had to make do without the boat or their first-class airfare. They ultimately decided to purchase economy tickets on a low-cost airline and spend the remainder of their trip in a discount hotel. Ryan's parents, meanwhile, were incensed. They discovered that I had paid for the entire vacation, even though they had assumed my parents were wealthy. "We had faith in you. They said you lied to us," according to my mom. As expected, Amber made things worse. "Perhaps you shouldn't be so frugal," she yelled at them. "It's not my problem if you can't afford Monaco." Ryan immediately called it quits on the engagement. The harm was done by the time they returned home, and I didn't feel bad for the first time in my life. My folks unexpectedly dropped by my flat a week after they returned. It didn't surprise me that they had always been tenacious in achieving their goals. "Please, Lauren, honey," Mom pleaded tremblingly through the door. "We are aware of our errors." "Let's just clarify," Dad added his voice. "We can resolve this. We remain family." I didn't respond. As if they weren't there, I was sitting on my couch and browsing through my phone. They knocked and begged for approximately 20 minutes before they eventually departed. My building management later informed me that they attempted to persuade him to let them in by stating that there was an emergency. I instructed him to send them packing when he phoned me first. I gave Mia a call that evening and asked her to join me for takeout. "You know you're famous." As she browsed through her phone, she smiled. "A lot of family drama groups shared your post. You are being hailed as a hero for confronting them." I chuckled. "Fantastic. All I need is that I have strangers that want to destroy my family's lives." Destroyed. Mia's eyebrow went up. "This is what they did to themselves. You just quit allowing them to walk all over you." Of course she was correct, Will. "They ever change in your opinion?" I inquired. Mia gave a head shake. "Most likely not. However, it is no longer your issue." She was also correct about that. I didn't care what people thought of me for the first time in my life. Whether they apologized or ever recognized how poorly they had treated me didn't matter to me. I was finished. I was no longer the invisible kid who was forgotten. I wasn't the ATM or the scapegoat. All I was doing was Lauren, and it was sufficient. Learning to stand on your own isn't always the most difficult aspect of growing up. It's figuring out when to leave